Hello, it's Nicolette, and today we are getting into everything you need to know in order to find an apartment in Paris. Finding an apartment in Paris is notoriously very difficult, and as someone who has gone through the process and found an apartment, I can say that is absolutely accurate. It was a lot. Let me tell you, there is so much that I wish I had known beforehand, and I really wish there had been a single video, a single article that had just gone through everything I needed to know. I'm here today to deliver this video to you. This video is going to be detailed, it's going to be in depth. I have no clue how long it's going to be, but I want to cram everything in there that you need to know. That means we're going to go over how to set your budget, choose the location, the size, the type of apartment, where to actually find apartments and apartment listings, and start going on apartment visits, how to create a dossier, and if you don't know what that is, definitely keep watching this video because that is incredibly important and very necessary for apartments here. So we're gonna go over what that is and how to put it together, what needs to be in there, a brief note on scams because scams do exist in this market. I almost got scammed myself, so we're gonna briefly touch on that. Tips on like what to be doing in the process while you're looking, where to be staying, and also just general overall tips, words of wisdom, advice that I wish I had received. If you are a foreigner, if you are not French, also especially if you don't have a traditional like salaried contract job, the process is going to be even more complicated for you. That's the boat I was in. So I'm also going to be talking from that perspective as a foreigner, as someone who does not have a French job, doesn't have French family to be a garant, which we'll also get into. We're going to get into it all, okay? So get ready. Grab yourself a tea, a coffee, a notepad. Maybe you want to take some notes. Let's find you a Parisian apartment. First off, I think it's important just to quickly get into why finding an apartment here is so difficult. There's kind of two main reasons. The first is that, well, it's an incredibly impacted market. There are a lot of people all the time looking for an apartment here. There's no slow months. There are definitely more difficult months, which is like when I was looking, which is August, September. Everyone's trying to find a place for the start of school, coming back from a vacation, starting a new job. The Paris market is kind of the European equivalent of the New York City market. There are people out here competing for closet-sized apartments without a toilet and maybe one window for a lot of money. But you also have the added level of French bureaucracy, French paperwork, Frenchiness. That's part of this process too. The second thing is that French landlords and agencies are incredibly particular about who they pick for the apartment. Essentially, according to French law, it is really difficult once a tenant is in an apartment and has signed a lease, it's really difficult to get them out of the apartment. They want to make sure that they are choosing the right person and that they are choosing a safe person. A lot of agencies and landlords are looking for and going to prefer French people who have a solid French job, probably a French garant, and make at least 3 times the monthly rent. That's like the ideal candidate. So if you are not the ideal candidate, which already there are like ideal candidates competing for the same apartment, but if you're not one of those people, if you're like me, that's a whole other level of difficulty. Okay, you're probably wondering right off the bat, how much does it cost to rent a Parisian apartment? As of right now, when I am filming this video, the average cost of renting a Parisian apartment is 34 euros per square meter. Not square foot. If you're American, you gotta type this into some kind of like conversion thing. This is gonna fluctuate based on a couple factors. The main one being which arrondissement or neighborhood in Paris the apartment is located in. There are more affordable, cheaper arrondissements. For example, I'm in the 18th. That's on the lower end of the price range. Also the 20th. The 13th. These are more affordable arrondissements. There are also much more expensive arrondissements. Like if you're looking in like Le Marais or like anything along that really centralized Seine area, that could be more like 36 euros per square meter. So that's going to be a huge factor. Also, there is the option of going kind of outside of Paris in a suburb. People are doing that. People are going to Montreuil, Bagnolet. Like there are like cheaper suburbs as well that are still on metro lines that people are also choosing. But in Paris, average is about 34 euros per square meter, which if you were comparing this to obviously New York City or London, but also San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, Paris is still cheaper than those cities. And there's also other things that make living in Paris cheaper than those cities. You know, things like socialized medicine, the cost of groceries, public transportation. Like, there are so many things that additionally bring the cost down of life in Paris. And actually, if you were living in a major metropolitan city in America, Paris might be cheaper than you're thinking. If you're living anywhere else, Paris is an expensive city. It's all relative. Also, furnished versus unfurnished, that's gonna change the price. Furnished is gonna be slightly more expensive because you're paying for the furniture. Also, if the apartment is rez-de-chaussée, if it's on the ground floor, like the street level, it's gonna be significantly cheaper because number one, you're not getting a lot of natural light. Number two, there are safety issues because it's directly on the street level. Like, here's your window, here's everyone in Paris. So essentially there are three types of apartments. There is the Chambre de bonne, which is like the maid's quarter. These are on the top floor, very tiny, like 9 to 14 square meters, and they usually do not have a toilet. There are some larger Chambre de bonnes that do have a toilet that are larger than 14 square meters, but in general, you're looking much smaller, like you're looking at a room. Next up would be a studio apartment. So a studio means it's like one big room. There is a separate bathroom usually, but the kitchen, the bedroom, the living room, it's all kind of one thing. Then next up would be like a one bedroom where the bedroom is separate. And then you got like 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, whole floor. You can keep going. But those are sort of like the categories and different options of apartments. Figure out which arrondissements you want to be looking in. You can be super specific, but if you have your heart set on a single arrondissement, but like I recommend considering a few. You don't want to consider all of Paris. That's going to be very overwhelming. That's how I started. No, don't do that. Pick specifically which few arrondissements you want to be looking in. You want to also decide, are you looking for furnished, unfurnished? Do you not care? These are things to think about before going into looking at listings. What's kind of the framework of what you're looking for? What I found is, ironically, if you are getting a super, super tiny apartment, like what they call a chambre de bonne, which is essentially the maid's quarter, I found, because that was what I first started looking at, that the price per square meter is much higher because there's like kind of a starting rate. I think the cheapest place I saw listed was 650 euros per month, and it was tiny. If you can, and you go from the chambre de bonne category to the small studio apartment category, there's gonna be like a pretty massive jump between a chambre de bonne and a small studio. So if you can afford to be looking in the low studio range, I highly recommend that because the chambre de bonnes are like more expensive per square meter and a lot of them are not nice. Like I saw some bad apartments. First apartment I visited was in the 800 euro range. It was, I think, 13 square meters. It did not have a toilet. The toilet was shared with 7 apartments, not 7 people, 7 apartments. I don't even know if that's legal. I guess it is because it existed and it was, you know, on the 7th floor without an elevator, but that's pretty common. That was like 815, 825. And then you jump to like 950, 1,000, you can start getting into the small studio range. So just something to think about. All right, now that you have set your budget, type of apartment, arrondissement, where do you find apartments? There are several different options and routes that you can take of how to find an apartment and where to be looking. I'm gonna preface this with, if you talk to any Parisian, the number one way to find an apartment is gonna be word of mouth. I'm gonna go into a bunch of other ways that you can find an apartment, including ways that I found an apartment. It was not through word of mouth. We'll get into the options, but the number one overarching one, just to be totally honest, is word of mouth. Because there are apartments here that don't even get listed because they are being passed to a relative, a friend, a neighbor who wants to switch apartments. Like there are apartments that you're not gonna even see listed. If you talk to a Parisian, I'm telling you 9 out of 10 times, they're gonna give you the wildest story of how they found their apartment. I talked to someone whose friend found their apartment on a Hinge date. They didn't end up dating the person, didn't go on a second date, but they did take their apartment, which they were moving out of. Also, one of the apartments I looked at, which was a contender, I found it through, I went to a friend's birthday at a techno rave of all places, started talking with his friend, and he was like, oh, my friend has an apartment, they're showing it this weekend. So literally the next day, after I'd gone to this techno rave, I was looking at a pretty solid apartment. It was not with an agency, it was not posted online, like this was directly through the owner, and they were only showing it to people they knew or friends of friends. So I was able to look at that apartment and submit an application. I didn't end up submitting an application for a couple of reasons, but it was like a possibility and there wasn't a ton of competition. If you were in Paris looking for an apartment, talk to anybody and everybody. Let it be known that you are looking for an apartment. But if that is not an option, or if that option is not panning out, there are concrete things that you can be doing in places you can be finding apartments. The first option is, in hindsight, the one I probably should have gone with, which is a brick and mortar agency. Let's say you know what arrondissement you want. You want to live in the 13th or near the 13th. You are going to find a brick and mortar agency, like one that has a building and you walk in and there are several real estate agents and they're going to help you find an apartment. Like you pay them a fee, you pay them a percentage and portion of the monthly rent. For paying that fee, they will help you find and secure an apartment. Obviously, they have multiple clients. They're not only serving you, they're serving other clients and they're probably going to show an apartment to multiple clients. But this is going to be like your cheerleader and someone who is going to help you get through this process and find a place. I have some friends who have used this option and found places that they're pretty happy with. Some additional costs, but if you can afford it, probably do that. There are also more like high-tech new age agencies, which are online. There are agencies specifically for people who are looking remotely. So like, let's say you're living in America or Canada and you got a job in Paris and you need to find an apartment and you need to find it before you get there, or you want to look remotely. There are specific sites where you can be finding apartments ahead of time. Obviously, downside of this is that you can't see them in person. Like, you just need to trust that it's a good apartment. But that is an option. Sites like Paris Attitude, Book a Flat, I'll list some on screen. The next option, which is the route I took, is doing it DIY on your own, not through agencies, but directly with landlords. The best site that I found, like that I got the most responses from and saw the most apartments from, is PAP. This is a site where landlords directly list the apartment and they're taking phone calls from people interested. There's no middleman. It's just the owner of the apartment. So the way that I successfully got visits and looked at apartments through this site is that I would like wake up in the morning, I would look through this site, and if something had been posted less than 30 minutes ago, like I'm telling you, these go fast, less than 30 minutes ago, I would call the phone number and say, I'm interested in this apartment. Can I set up a viewing? Sometimes it'd be like, we already booked like 50 people to look at this apartment, sorry. Other times you'll get like a voicemail. It'll go to a voicemail and be like, this person's voicemail box is full, which means the apartment's probably already full. It's kind of like a really fast game where you need to like, if something has been posted for longer than an hour, it's probably already taken. So I was able to see several apartments that way, but you do have to be pretty quick. The next site that you can try is Le Bon Coin. This is essentially the like French Craigslist. So something to keep in mind, there can be scams on here. So if you're looking at an apartment and it seems too good to be true, like 500 euros a month and like has its own toilet, it's probably a scam. There are other scams, which I'm gonna get into later. But Le Bon Coin is also an option. You're gonna do the same thing as PAP. You're gonna find the phone number or find the email and contact them, say you want to have a visit. Se Loger, that's also another option. I didn't see any apartments from Se Loger. I think I contacted like one landlord, maybe two, and they were booked, but I didn't end up seeing anything. PAP is really like where it's at, I think. There is also an app called Gens de Confiance. It's an app where you need to be recommended by someone that already has the app. So if you find a French person who has the Gens de Confiance app, they can invite you and get you on the app. You can't just download it and start using it. Also, Facebook groups. There are a ton of Facebook groups that are geared towards finding an apartment. Like landlords will list in Facebook Marketplace or in Facebook groups their apartments and you can directly contact them. Obviously, also, please be aware of possible scams, like if it looks too good to be true or if you're getting some weird vibes. But actually, Facebook is how I found my apartment. Immediately contacted the landlord, set up a visit, really connected with the landlord. She was expat friendly, which is so important. If you are an expat, basically you need to find a landlord who is an expat, knows an expat, is willing to rent to an expat. It's a thing. They absolutely exist, and bless them, bless them. That is really your best bet if you are not French, because a lot of other landlords will not accept non-French people. I also want to note, if you are open to living with roommates, this is another option. You can find an apartment via a roommate that already has an apartment. There are sites, I'm forgetting the name right now, but we'll list it on the screen, where you can sign up and like make a little profile and find other people who are looking for apartments, or people who have found apartments and are looking for extra people to move in. Obviously, when choosing a roommate that you do not know, be very vigilant. That's a big thing, to decide to move in and sign a lease with someone. You know, meet the person ahead of time, and then if you're getting bad feelings, don't do it. But also, if you are like a student, there are definitely student housing options, so please look into that if you're moving here with a school program. If you're moving for some kind of like other program, find other people in that program and you can look together, and that will also bring the cost down. Okay, now we're getting into the very, very nitty-gritty stuff, but very necessary stuff, which is the dossier. A dossier is absolutely necessary to apply for, get, or even look at an apartment sometimes. There are a couple documents that you absolutely need to include in the dossier, and some that are not mandatory but are highly recommended. There are certain documents that landlords or agencies might request. It's also gonna seem like a lot of information. So this is another area where we need to be aware of scams. When someone asks you like, okay, like you're gonna apply for this apartment, please send your dossier. This is what you need to send. You need to, at minimum, send pièce d'identité. This means either your passport or your identification card. If you're a foreigner, don't just send like your state ID. That's not gonna work. You need to send your passport. Or if you have like a carte de séjour, you can send that. Next, now this is like a weird catch-22 and very French. You need a justification de domicile. You need to prove that you already have a place that you are living. This seems very counterintuitive. There are a couple options with this. If you are currently staying in an apartment, like let's say maybe you are living in the south of France and you have an apartment and you're looking to move to Paris. So if you still have that apartment in the south of France, you would send your most recent electricity bill or gas bill that has your name on it, that has the address, and it needs to be within the past, I believe, 3 months. Other options, if you are staying with a friend, a relative, they need to send, or you need to get from them a letter, and there are like templates online that you can get, a letter that is signed by them that says this like person born this date in this city is staying with me free of charge. Like, I attest to this. And they need to attach their electricity or gas bill with their name on it and address and their identification card, like their passport or their French ID card. Lots of info. But if you're staying with a friend or a relative, that's how you prove that. I think if you were staying in an Airbnb, like a long-term Airbnb, you can include that. When I was looking in the south of France, that's what I included. I included a printout receipt of the Airbnb that I was staying in for, I had over a month-long booking. So that's another option. The third thing you need to include is your last 3 pay stubs, or if you're retired, your last 3 pension checks. Now, if you are like me and you don't have a consistent paycheck, or you're not making like 3 times the amount of rent, then you gotta get into the garant category, which we will get into. You can include a work contract if you have that. Very, gives you lots of brownie points. They love seeing a work contract. Your last tax statement. They're getting everything. They're getting everything. But yes, actually, they can ask for your last tax statement. Or this is another way. If you were like, have your own business, you're self-employed, you're freelance, you can, instead of the last 3 pay stubs, include the last 3 years of taxes. Also, they might ask for your last 3 rent receipts, like proof that you have been paying rent. I had my previous landlord write me a letter and be like, I attest that this person was living in this apartment until this date and they paid this much per month on time. And she signed the letter and I included that in my dossier. So that's another thing, because I didn't have any like official printed rent receipts. If you were a student, you need to include your carte étudiante, like your student ID card, and your certificat de scolarité, a certificate of like being enrolled in the programs. So if you're a student, if you have a weird source of income or not enough income, you're gonna need to have a garant. A garant is a very French thing. It is essentially a French person that will vouch for you and is saying, if this person disappears off the face of the earth or stops paying rent, I will pay rent. I am responsible for this. And here is proof that I have enough money to do that. Now, don't freak out yet, because if you don't have this kind of person in your life, there are ways to get around it. But essentially, the ultimate classic garant is a French person. So like, if you have a French relative or a very, very close French friend that is willing to be your garant, they're gonna need to send their, you guessed it, ID card / passport, one of those, a letter, which you can find templates online, and their last 3 paycheck stubs, or if they're retired, their last 3 pension checks as proof of their income. So instead of sending your proof of income, you were sending your garant's proof of income. Because of like legality and legal reasons and this whole it being really difficult to kick people out of apartments once they're in it, they're gonna want a French person. When I was living in the south of France, when I found my apartment there, I used a service called Garant Me. I did have to pay for it. There was a yearly fee, and they will serve as your garant. My landlord took that as the garant. They were like, yep, we'll take this. There are some landlords who will not take Garant Me, but then that's not your landlord. That's not the person you're gonna be working with. There are landlords that will take and accept Garant Me, so that is a fantastic option. There's also Visal, which is through the government, and it's free, and you have to be under, I think, like 26 or 28. Less and less people are taking that. So like, that is a free option, but not a lot of people are taking it. Now, really important, because you're sending like your entire life story documents with highly classified information, you want to probably watermark these documents. That's what I did. I watermarked them, which is, when you like put the text on it, like I'll put on screen like the exact text that I used. It was like something like in French, like only for renting purposes or something, and added a watermark on the document so that no one could be like using these clean documents for their own criminal purposes. Be careful who you send these documents to. Make sure that this is not a scam. It's not one of those like, oh, 500 euro apartment. Not like someone who like emails you randomly and you're like, how do you get my email? Like, okay, be vigilant of who you were sending this to and make sure that it is watermarked. Also, since we're on this topic, just a note on scams. Scams do exist, especially on sites like Le Bon Coin or Facebook. If someone is asking you for money, for rent, before you have signed any documents, before you have seen the apartment, that's a scam. I was emailing someone and they were like, oh, here's the apartment, like here's photos, this is where it's located, it's like this much per month. It was like kind of a good price, not like a shocking price, but kind of a good price. So that was already a number one red flag. I was like, okay, can I come visit the apartment? Can I see it in person? And then they had some like wild, weird story of like, oh, you can't see the apartment because I'm like abroad right now in Switzerland helping my sick parents. And I'm not able to get back, but it's a fantastic apartment. And like, as soon as you send 2 months rent, no, that is absolutely a scam. Ignore, do not respond to that email, and definitely do not send them your documents. Next up, how long is this gonna take? Where should you be staying while you're looking for an apartment, etc., etc. So for me personally, the process took 2-ish months to find an apartment, from arriving in Paris to moving into my apartment, which in hindsight was very quick. I was on an apartment visit and a French person, not an expat, a French person who had a garant said they had been looking for 6 months. I truly hope that man found an apartment because 6 months is wild, but it is like does take that long for some people. But yeah, for me it took 2 months. So what I did was I first stayed in a month-long sublease. I thought I would easily find it in 3 to 4 weeks, be out of that sublease and be in my new apartment. So I found a sublease through, it was a friend of a friend. They were going away for the summer. After that, when I realized I still hadn't found a place and needed somewhere to stay, I stayed on a French couch for a few days. After that, I moved into an Airbnb outside of Paris. The Airbnb in Paris, central Paris, very, very expensive. They're like 3 times the rent of what the apartment probably is. So if you want to be finding a Airbnb temporary lodging while you're looking, I would recommend finding an Airbnb in a suburb. I was staying in Vincennes, which is a very bougie suburb, very nice, incredibly clean. They like power wash their sidewalks. But I found that the Airbnbs are actually much cheaper than the in Paris ones. Other options, you could look for a long-term sublease. You know, if you're not 100% sure you want to find a permanent place here, you could get a 6-month sublease if you just want to live in Paris for 6 months, a year sublease. That's an option as well. All right, next up, just general advice, tips, wisdom. Number 1, know that this is going to take time and money. So be patient. And if possible, I highly recommend that before you decide to move to Paris, before you start looking, to have some sort of savings. It can be like a small amount, something in addition to like your monthly income. So as like a safety net. Like I, for example, ended up needing to find an extra month's worth of housing that I did not anticipate needing. And it was a month of housing that was more than normal rent. So just knowing that you have a safety net of some sort, even if it's a small amount of savings, that can make a huge difference and also make the process way less stressful. Next would be visit Paris before you move here. I really do not recommend moving to Paris if you have never visited here, or if you visited here for like maybe 2 days. Visiting Paris as a tourist and actually living here are two very different things. Visit here for a longer period of time, or you know, maybe you want to get an Airbnb for a month and stay here and see how you like it. Or maybe you want to find a temporary sublease. Like maybe your dream is like, oh, I just want to like experience Paris and living there for like 6 months or 3 months. You could find a sublease and stay for that period of time. But know that like making the decision to move here and sign like a 1 to 2 year lease, that's a big decision, and you want to make sure that Paris is the city that you want to live in. You also want to get a sense of the arrondissements and like what neighborhood you actually want to live in, and that takes, you know, time, like visiting the neighborhood, experiencing it. Paris is a huge city and it's a very diverse city. Each part has a very different vibe. Next tip would be make friends and network. I hate that word, absolutely hate that word. If you are in Paris or near Paris and you are actively looking for an apartment, like reach out to people, talk to people, bring it up in conversation. The number 1 most common best way to find an apartment is through other people. There might be someone who knows someone who is looking to fill an apartment, okay? You never know. Talk about it, reach out to people, make it known that you are looking for an apartment. Next would be learn some French. I know that's huge, like become fluent in this language. Like, no, you don't have to become fluent, but like knowing French made this process so much easier. Like I cannot imagine how much more difficult this would have been if I didn't know French. I was so grateful that I did know French and I could be calling up a landlord and scheduling a visit and having the visit completely in French. You know, if you have a friend in France that can like make those phone calls for you or like go on the visits with you, incredible, amazing, do that. And obviously there are agencies that speak English and, you know, don't require any French knowledge or skills. If you're able to pay for that, that's absolutely an option. So I'm not saying you have to be fluent in French or know French, but it's really makes this process easier. And lastly, I just want to say, have hope. As someone who went through like a dark night of the soul, difficult process, but came out on the other end, it's possible. If you approach this process calmly, patiently, and with hope, you're gonna succeed. You can find an apartment. It might take longer than you thought. It might be in a neighborhood that you didn't think of moving to. But if you have that strong hope and desire, you can do it. If you are feeling called to move here, Paris probably wants you. All right, I hope this video was helpful. I have no clue how long. This is probably gonna be the longest video on my YouTube channel. If you have other questions, please leave them in the comments and I will try my best to address them or answer them if I know the answer. Yeah, and let me know also if there are other videos you want to see, other topics you want me to cover. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I post a bunch of French content, Paris content. All right, that's all for now, and bonne chance, bon courage with your Paris apartment journey. Au revoir.